Clunes Booktown Festival is a celebration of the book, filled with bookstalls, author talks, workshops and thought-provoking conversations in the historic Victorian township of Clunes.
We are gathered here today on unceded Jarrah land. Very happy to be here. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present. But what a beautiful place. I'm very happy to be back in the Central West after 4 years down south. We are today talking about sustainability in a changing climate. I think there's going to be a bit more of a word beyond sustainability in a changing climate fairly soon. Yeah, we're going to go for 45 minutes. Then there'll be 15 minutes for questions. So write down your best questions so we can fit it in. I believe there may also even be prizes for questions that tickle somebody's fancy. Right. All right, so on stage, here we have Costa Georgiadis. Mr. Gardening Australia, natural pool designer, chicken lover, Verge gorilla gardener, and many other things besides. Writer of 2 books, 3 books, 4 books, oh God. 2 books so far with many coming out in the future. Yep. I'm going to say this at the start about books, but I'll do this first. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
We have David Holmgren, originator of the permaculture concept, gardener, author of 4 books.
Something like that.
Many books, lots of books, and lover of celery.
Thanks, Kirsten,
No
and
worries.
welcome back to Jarrah Country and Central Victoria, the richest goldfield in the world.
Yeah.
And this whole town is a part of that explosive, both destructive and creative time that we inherit.
And I'm Kirsten. Hi, I'm from Milkwood.
Yeah.
I've got a few books too. I run Milkwood with my partner. We teach permaculture and mushroom growing and those sorts of skills online. We were very lucky enough to be living at Meliadora with Dave and Sue for 3 or 4 years a while ago. And since then, I'm down in Lutruwita, Tasmania now. So we're going to go for it. Oh, the other thing I need to say is that if I do cut anyone off, it's to keep us on track because we have 3 people that could easily talk for an hour by themselves about all the things they'd like to say. And I am aware of time. We're going to go for 45 minutes. There'll be 15 minutes for questions. And afterwards, Costa and I are going to run down to the readings tent where there'll be book signings, if you like. And Dave is going to run to the Bluestone. Is it called the Bluestone?
The Wesley Bluestone.
The Wesley Bluestone, where...
Just up around the corner.
Yeah.
Church of Holmgren.
Because in Dave's spare time, he also runs a publishing company, so there probably will be 1 or 2 books there for signing and browsing and consuming.
And being always at the edge where
At the
at
edge,
the
where it's
fringe
at.
of Booktown rather than at the readings centre of the world in the main street where you folks will be.
Yeah. The title of this talk, Sustainability in a Changing Climate. We'd love to send you all home with some thoughts. We'd love to challenge you. And we'd also love you to leave today with some good ideas. Because as much as we are all dealing with compounding catastrophes and the polycrisis that is the world at this point, we also need to get things done. And finding a balance between the big and the small is how we sustain ourselves and how we keep each other going as well. So hopefully there'll be some nuggets today to take home that in between the raging and the fighting also keep your heart whole and keep your community in a better state. But firstly, Mr. Holmgren, you wrote a book a while ago now called Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. Where are you at with the concept of beyond sustainability right now in terms of, I know you teach permaculture design courses as well, when you have students come up to you and go, oh my God, How do I start adapting to what's going on? What are some of the things that you have to say to them in terms of their household level and community level responses?
Yeah, well, I suppose Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability was published in 2002, so that's over 20 years ago. It was a direct challenge to the emerging sustainability orthodoxy, a big book of complex ideas rather than empowering what we can do, a book of theory, really. And it's in its second edition. It's 12 languages around the world. Never actually had a mainstream review in Australia. So in a way, as a public intellectual, not quite thumbing my nose at the sustainability discourse, but it was to say that this is actually sort of fundamentally flawed, this idea that we are going to sustain this society. Of course, Stuart Hill in the foreword talked about it also in a more positive way of going beyond sustainability to how now people talk about regenerating something further, creating something better than what we have. And I suppose it means that in both senses, but we see that starts at the personal and the household level and the informal level, how we have, especially in the affluent world, so much opportunity, so many resources. We're not really short of resources. We're short of the skills and creativity and freedom to take what is around. When I say take, often two abundances, the incredible wasteful society that's sloughing off stuff that on a scale that I thought was already extreme when I was young. And is now just at this amazing opportunity for people to parasitise off society's wastes, whether all your clothes,
just harvest,
the op shop,
forage.
What we call skipping, what people call dumpster diving. So many people living creatively from those wastes, but also, ironically, in spite of the sense of the polycrisis and nature under attack, that especially in the affluent countries, huge amounts of natural abundance, that nature's productivity is everywhere, from the edible weeds in the pavement or the backyard to the surplus of rabbits hopping around this landscape, or everywhere I go in rural Australia, the surplus of biomass that is compost for building soil, that is energy for keeping us warm. So many opportunities to recognise the abundances and the opportunities, and how to build a skill base that is not just for ourselves, but how to be useful to another person in our community, in our families, rather than useful to a corporation.
Beautiful. Within that, Costa, you do a lot of gardening, do a lot of talking about gardening, do a lot of showing people how to garden, a lot of encouraging people to garden. In terms of where we are, especially in Australia, within this changing climate, how do you approach that factor within your work? The climates are changing. What grows now will not be what grows in 10 years' time. The rainfall here will not be what it is in 10 years' time, depending on where you are. Given that you are a storyteller, and given that you are always threading positive solutions and let's get going vibes into everything you do, how do you thread through, hey, adaptation's a good idea as well in there?
There's a question.
Soz.
First of all, sustainability in a changing climate. The moment you mention the word climate, there's already a divide in the room. The language we use as storytellers is either going to make or break whoever it is you're trying to communicate with and whatever story it is that you're going to tell. So here I am in a public position to create stories and open conversations. Now, just my choice of words is either going to open someone up to the possibility or it's going to shut them down. And that to me is the big opportunity, because I've got to read the room. And each and every one of us, we know how to read the room in a family situation. You know that Uncle Joey over there doesn't necessarily go too well with Aunt Felicity. And if you see that they're on a collision at the Christmas barbie, you get in there and distract, because you go, we want to have a nice arrangement here and not derail it from the moment we kick off. So I'm constantly looking at storytelling as not this fixed story that I take with me and say, there's the PowerPoint. I'm thinking for weeks ahead of anything and anyone I talk to. I'm putting my finger on the pulse from the moment I arrive, whether that's at a primary school, whether that's at a school. I'm speaking to people, trying to work out where is it that I'm going to put this thread. It's critical in these times. I suppose what I'm trying to say here is that in these times, every word we utter, every story we craft is more important now than ever before. And if we set off on the wrong foot, bang, there's the line down the middle and you'll be cancelled, right? People will switch off. So for me, in a time when we're supposedly more connected than ever before, we're more disconnected because people totally pull the plug out the moment something doesn't appeal to them. So that's not to say that you go soft on the ideas. You need to ease your way into it. And if it doesn't get picked up the first time, you come back around. And it makes talking to you, because you're here as book readers, writers, you're storytellers as well. Just because you're buying books and coming to a festival, you're telling stories. And I think it needs to be more crafted than ever before, in the sense that you've got to connect with who you're talking to. And so my big picture thinking at the moment is we need to go more hyper-local, even though it's a changing climate in a changing world and they're global issues. I believe we need to go hyper-local and we need to be narrowcasting. What do you mean narrowcasting? We've got a global...
What do you mean narrowcasting?
Well, narrowcasting means for a long time we've been broadcasting, we've had broadcasters that have kind of told a story that has manipulated truths like anything else. Now we've got even a broader broadcasting on platforms that are manipulating and using all sorts of ways to craft stories that will get more and more tricky because of ways to tell lies. And so what we need to be looking at, I believe, is that idea of narrow casting, where you're casting out at the people that you know, casting out at familiar networks, using networks and building collaborations so that that story is carried by people that are connected to it, not just have scrolled through it, not just have been part of 10,000 likes. 10,000 likes means nothing. We need to make those stories connect. And by being hyper-local and casting directly to the people we want to connect and become the amplifiers, then I believe we can take that truth much further. And if we take the truth further, then we'll actually build a narrative that will have longevity and be regenerative and be able to be sustained by cracking the solutions locally with the global picture in mind.
Yeah. The narrowcasting thing makes me think of the 12 permaculture principles that you very helpfully designed and brought into the world, which has been of huge help to many, many people and many, many organisations trying to scaffold their way from previous ways of doing and being into a way that is more holistic and adapting to what is actually there rather than what we think should be there. And you teach in quite a few environments, quite a few biospheres, not only your own. But it just makes me think of how the narrowcasting is such an important thing, the hyperlocal thing, the sense of country, the sense of where you are, and how applying the stories or the solutions to the creek in Clunes or the creek wherever you are is fractalizes into all these other ways that we could use those skills, but it applies them in the local context and allows people to feel and have relationship with what's actually happening. which is both excellent for the local creek, but also excellent for those people's skill sets, no matter where else they end up in life.
And what that means is you're actually doing. And so rather than me say, you should do this, which is a very different narrative to look at what we're doing and allow people a chance to sort of step around the vehicle, give it a kick in that traditional style of, yeah, not bad, eh? Not bad. That I feel like that's that's exactly what.
And the community level of that, in terms of like, you know, we can all have a worm farm in our back garden, which is awesome. You should all have a worm farm in your garden. But also it's such a different thing to a community coming together to learn skills together. And I think there's just so much goodness there.
Well, that narrow casting and the hyperlocal can be seen in, I think, two different ways, because there's that we can all connect to the people that we're famous to, even if we're only famous to 15 other people. But when we're in a local community, we're just another ordinary person. And there's actually, within any local community, there's all different ways of seeing and thinking about things. And when we first came to Hepburn in the mid-80s, we were pretty low-key about things. And towards the end of the 80s, we were working down the gully, as we say, in a sort of project that was an informal, unfunded, unapproved sort of version of land care without the paperwork and the poisons. And I was working with a local good friend of ours, Vern Howell, and he said, "What's this permaculture stuff about, Dave?" And I said, "Oh, don't worry, Vern, it's just what you and I do down the gully on the weekends." We later had him come as a mentor on our design courses, and we are actually now attempting to defend a beautiful forest that he created on the Eganstown water reserve from it being taken back and annihilated by Parks Victoria. So that the people in the community that would see value in what that is actually really across very broad spectrums. And as I said with my Retro Suburbia book, you don't even need to believe in climate change or peak oil or any of those things to see some of the common sense, the enlightened self-interest. And if we can connect on those things that are just no regrets, this works for us, then they are the building blocks of creating
of a good life and a good ecosystem. Yeah, and that is one of the many, many things I love about permaculture. When I started getting into permaculture over 20 years ago, was that there was this skill base and this skill set and this principle-based approach that led you to change bits and pieces in your life and community in a way that was a bloody good idea no matter what. Like if we somehow turn the ship around and the climate reverts, which it's not going to, but even if we did, a lot of these skills would be an excellent, excellent way to live. And if we're moving into uncertain futures, which we certainly are, these skills are excellent to have on board, both in a community sense and in a household sense. And to me, it was like, well, that's a winner then, isn't it? Like, this is good shit to do, and we're going to do it either way.
And what you've done with the permaculture living skills course and book is take those complex abstract ideas and then distill how do those actually relate to people in all sorts of ordinary Australian situations, and make that connection in the same way that Brenna Quinlan and Charlie McGee have taken those ideas with children and music. And I see, Costa, your identification with gardening and this sort of friendly, easygoing aspect of sustainability, even if it's not seen as the really dealing with the big issues, it actually is dealing with the most important issue that in reality, when I look at ecological building, and I am an ecological builder, I've built 3 passive solar natural houses, but I know what this country needs more is ecological food production. We need to do it every year. We probably have enough buildings, but gardening is, for so many people, the connection to that working relationship with nature. So it's actually really central, and it doesn't require all that complex thinking for people to connect to, but they are connecting into really the most fundamental stuff.
Exactly. Like what I want to do is runway and onboard people back into nature. And I'm not going to do that if I start talking about the world is at X degrees and we need to bring it back to this and there's this ecological crisis here and there's that there. Like we got to bring people on board, and that's got to be engaging. It's got to be entertaining. It's got to be fun. So even when I started with Gardening Australia, I couldn't say, oh, I want to do this story on permaculture, because that wasn't the consciousness of the show at that point, right? So that doesn't mean that I gave up. It meant that, well, let's do this story on this incredible garden over here, and then let the people drop the word where they drop the word. So I'm not hanging myself on a cross saying I'm a one-trick pony here, doing detriment to the topic, because then that would mean that someone who doesn't understand it is producing a story on the wrong slant. So I let that just, oh, there's one, there's another one, there's one here, there's one there. People go, oh, that's a bit sort of, they sentenced me to 20 years of boredom. No, it's not. It's about getting those stories out there to the point now that someone onboarded into our show as a permaculture educator. Woo. And a Maloney, right?
Yay.
That was a subtle Trojan process, right?
I remember those years, and I remember how much restraint you had to have. You're like, I want it to be over there, but it's still here. And we're going to get it there. And the
and it's...
But that's a long lineage. I mean, Bill Mollison and himself, Gardening Australia from the beginning, Peter Cundall, were mates in the Tasmanian Organic Gardening and Farming Society, founded in 1972, 2 years before I met Bill Mollison. And of course, those discussions and all of those things, it seems to me Gardening Australia has been this amazing positive way that permaculture has interthreaded through the consciousness of Australians in this, without the huge blocks of, that you've got to be on board with some completely different view of the universe. And, perhaps is attributed to that saying that permaculture is revolution disguised as gardening, and also allows cranky ecological pioneers like me to keep pushing the boundaries and pulling the rug out from under people, even some of the orthodoxies that I helped create, because there's all of those conversations. The downside in Australian context is, because permaculture is so well known as a sort of a cool form of organic gardening, it's sort of, to some extent, dismissed in the serious mainstream policy, how are we actually going with the big issues? And even though in other countries, like in France, that's, not the case. Permaculture is seen as very much part of the whole degrowth movement. Of course, the French are very into the intellectual and that abstract. But in some ways, that strength and sort of disadvantage is just part of that world we live in. And I think it's really great in a way that a lot of the influence of permaculture has been actually under the radar and with other labels.
Other names.
Yeah.
It's that Trojan thing. If I'm jamming it in someone's face, it's going to have a limited longevity, because what will happen is people will just go, oh, yeah, I know that. And they know that much. It's just like something, if I mention the word keyline, right? You may have heard it. Oh, there's swales. Oh, yeah, I know that. No, you don't. Like, you don't. Like, so if I'm half baking this continuous, holding this banner up, marching the streets, permaculture, I've got to be careful not to undermine it and bring it into a semi-consciousness, not that level where, for example, Kirsten and Nick confronted that status quo when they said, well, let's do it over a period of 8 weekends, because people don't have what David and Bill were doing back in the 80s was saying, we've got to pull you out of this consciousness of the world to give you 2 weeks, because we need 2 weeks to kind of paint a picture that it isn't just endless resources and so on and so forth. And Nick said, well, people don't necessarily have 2 weeks. Let's manipulate something a little and give a different chance to onboard people. And to me, again, it's about onboarding. How do we onboard them? And it's that Trojan thing. While others are locking on, while others are pushing harder lines, it's about how do you onboard someone in your family that might necessarily be on it. Give them fresh produce. Get them tasting that difference. Grow them some plants and say, here, try this. Get them over when you're harvesting something. Say, oh, I need some help. Like these are these Trojan ways to get in. And probably for me, when I started, I said, I want more families, I want more children, because that's how we have to grow the population. We need to onboard a whole new generation. So that's where I got in with Dirt Girl, and then we turned a successful international animation into a children's show called Get Grubby TV. I was still plugging away at the ABC to say, we need a children's show on gardening. That has taken an extra 8 years. Right? From when we started Get Grubby TV in 2015, that's still going gangbusters, right? And I'm now meeting the teenagers who grew up with us over 10 years. And we're now working a whole new level with Dirt Girl, who's growing, and she's now going after them, right? But we last year launched Gardening Australia Junior. Now that, to me, is massive, because if we're going to grow the audience, we need to grow the audience with a trusted brand. And when we can grow it with a trusted brand like that, and that the second series is on at the moment, and between you and me, we've onboarded the third series, which means when you get to 3 or 4, that starts to become part of the budget zeitgeist, that this is a goer. So when it comes to changing values and creating that runway for that mindset to take it into families, the children are just taking it up with vigor. And for me,
that's where it's
really
at.
Important, because we can look at the crises everywhere. But if you're in that tent this morning and you heard the answers that the children were giving, and you heard the energy and the vigor that's there on tap, that we can be creating a linear program, even though I blew up when they said they want to release it as a full bulk. I said, why are we releasing 20 episodes at once? Because I don't want to encourage freaking binge watching, right? Because that's not what it's about, right? We spend 9 months making a program with each episode has a project at its base. This is all about an insect hotel. This is all about making a lizard lounge. This is turning doing a bathroom ecovation and growing plants. This is about a vertical wall. I want that to be a week, and then a following week, a build up in all the release of information. I don't want this binge where the child sits there and watches it all and doesn't do the activity, because it's got to be observed.
It's a different behaviour.
Yeah. It's got to be observe, connect, and act.
Yeah.
And so I blew up and I went up and I said, why? And they said, that is the way that the whole new media landscape is structured like that. And I said, well, we need linear. And they said, it's still being released linear. So that's the main thing, that it's released linear, so that week on, week in, week out, I'm reminding people on all the platforms that Gardening Australia Junior's on. It's on 20 minutes before Gardening Australia. So we're onboarding the families into the children's show and then into Gardening Australia. So there is absolutely to me, I get as many parents come up to me and say, oh, I learned so much from Gardening Australia Junior. I didn't know the difference between a herb and a spice. Little things, right? There's no difference. I don't adjust my storytelling for adults or children. The only tweak I do is with the children, it's a bit more, right? If I do that on the on the adult show, people will go, he's a Fruit Loop.
They do not. Okay, maybe they do.
I do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of that, sort of the ingesting the information, allowing your body to process, allowing your mind to process, going out and doing something, and the opposite of binging information at this time, in a time of such urgency, in a time of such, oh my God, I think is more important than ever. And it is so easy to be like, whoa, so much urgency, got to do it all now, got to consume it all now, got to figure it out all now. We are in crisis, but the bite-sized approach to solutions, to adaptation, to any daily practice, whether it's calming your nervous system down or planting beans, needs to be iterative, and it needs to be piece by piece, and we cannot get away from that. That is absolutely true and needed.
Like my story on the show last week was making a mindful garden. Like this for the kids, right? Getting stones, making a mandala, creating patterns, sitting quietly, having a cup of tea, observing these things, chilling out. Imagine the parents and the children are watching this, holding conversations, sharing information, stopping, slowing down over a story like that, over going out and making their insect hotel or bringing some plants into the bathroom and growing more plants indoors and having things around them. Like that to me is this chance to create those conversations over time and to remove that urgency and just provide the focus and the calm where we don't get carried away with this idea of anxiety. We're driving everyone down a road of anxiety.
Anxiety, fear and loathing. I think as well as not projecting that onto children, as adults and especially a lot of us in the room as seniors, I think as elders, I think it's essential to see how not to be driven by that fear and certainly not loathing. And in returning to actually the climate emergency that everyone seems to be getting more hysterical about, I can remember in Central Victoria teaching on permaculture design courses in the early 90s and saying, don't worry about that average rise in global temperature. It's the footnote, increased extreme weather events. And then we were doing the Friars Forest Eco Village in the late 90s, and I was mapping all the extreme events because we were working with some of the most erodible soils in this region. And we had 3 1 in 5 year flood events, average dry seasons, a 1 in 15 year event, and a 1 in 20 year event. And I was gearing up to this, like, way ahead of the curve. What's happened since then? Well, we've been through the millennial drought. We've had some extreme years, but my actually lived experience, I said to the earth-moving contractor we worked with who did all that work, who did all the keyline work with Darren Doherty at that time and others, and him being a climate skeptic, he said, hey, Dave, we're still building dams. There's still water in them. And I said to him, actually, yeah, I thought this onset was actually going to happen a lot faster. So I now find myself in this situation where in terms of my expertise in bushfire design, I say, yes, there could be a climate component in that, are bushfires getting worse? But I can tell you absolutely a lot of it is the change in the psychosocial climate and the way policies are being implemented and the changes in land management. And that I am on the same page there as Phil Cheney, the now in his 80s, who was the guy Fraser gave $15 million to light big bushfires and test whether those water bombers actually work.
Wow.
And he told me that the Black Summer on the East Coast, there were 3 bad blow-up days. He said basically they didn't fight the fires. Now, there's all sorts of complexities in that, but the psychosocial climate, the policy climate, all of these things are changing rapidly, along with these more complex, abstract things such as actually is that climate driving those bushfires. So all this stuff that, yes, I expected, but I can just say, don't get in so much in that fear and loathing about what nature is going to destroy us, that positive that we can embrace and see the opportunities, see the abundances that are around us, and deal with changes that come is really important. And of course, never to be projecting that onto children, even if we do fear some of that.
But rather than externalizing it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as each of our nervous systems can handle different levels of
Yeah.
internal knowledge around what is happening and how that affects our households and communities and landscapes, there's different levels of work and engagement for every different
maybe that's
citizen.
partly just the dissident in me, that I was saying all these things when no one was noticing in the 90s, and now that everyone's noticing and the media is just like full of this all the time, I'm going, really? Someone said to me about that, don't you just automatically, the goat that walks
Go
the other
sideways
way when everyone is saying something? And yeah, there's an element.
You're not a contrarian.
No.
Never. You, Dave, come on. I do like how a lot of the conversation, I feel that when I entered this sort of work 20 years ago, there was a lot of we can turn this ship around sort of vibes. And I do appreciate, and I feel sort of a sense of relief that it's much easier to have conversations about adaptation and moving forward as communities by whatever means necessary, rather than if we fix the external big thingy, we'll all be fine. Because I love how that relates back to household skills and community skills, and, we have to take care of each other regardless. And it's not like if we can stop the big scary thing, that everything will be right, because we still are living under capitalism and patriarchy and all these things that have made for pretty stuffed up communities in many ways. But you live in Hepburn, adjacent to Daylesford, where there are all these incredible, and many communities have this, all these incredible community initiatives and community warming and that has the effect of creating community now, but also creating community that can endure in whatever crisis comes next. Because as we know, if you have a relationship with people before the crisis, you're much more likely to be nice to each other and work together on solutions, whether they're the immediate aftermath of a fire or whatever. And you're in relationship with people. Can you just speak a little bit to how the Daylesford community...
Yeah.
It's just such an inspiring
it's
example.
interesting. We came to Hepburn in 1985, and it was in a period where the echo of the Back to the Land movement was sort of fading as, Alan Bond was the hero of Australia, and that early phase, it was now in the greed is good culture and people were moving back to the city. In 1978, there was a permaculture group in Daylesford, and of course, Terry White created the International Permaculture Journal just north of us here in Maryborough. So there was, and I came to Hepburn and, with Sue and her two pre-teenage children, and being part of some degree of, dare I say, the counterculture was part of the social infrastructure that we were looking at, but it was also the connection into many different sorts of people in that community. And, but there was things like, I thought the best health food shop actually in Victoria was in our little town. And over the decades, the building and threading together with different elements in the community and building some of that social infrastructure has been, especially with so many colleagues who are more the community networkers than I am.
But you're a community participant.
Yeah. And I think that has worked in many different levels. And I mean, for many years, Sue and I still felt we were the sort of radicals out there pushing the boundaries a bit. And then we met our friends Patrick and Meg, who We thought, wow, they're more radical than us. And, you know, amongst the things they do is the fire circle, men's and women's fire circle on community land that is managed by them with their goats in informal relationship with neighbours, and their forest and free school, which is not a school that doesn't work under any of the regulations because they actually don't charge anything. It's a gift economy, and
Gathering.
come along and just do stuff in the bush and whatever. So many of those threads of connection, I think, and again, like I said earlier, with the radical hippies from the outside, middle-class, university-educated, and the local right-wing libertarian rednecks, there's all of those threads still, and people developing those more. So I think those connections, and a lot of them informal, what makes it feels Central Victoria is a sort of a hub of permaculture activity, but it's not so much necessarily labelled that, or, you know, it's in many different ways.
Yeah. And ideally, these sorts of threads would have been connected continuously for a long time, but in the century that we're living in, and last century, there was a lot of breaking and a lot of reweaving of
that reconnection to the Indigenous is part of that story too. That and those folks, Patrick Jones and Meg Ullman, have a sort of deep, strong connection in that way. And we are seeing that the broken story of how we manage our public forests. We have tiny little examples of forest gardening that the Judge Wrong are doing on small plots, which is all in line with what we do in our greenies with chainsaws, sustainable forestry.
Yep.
And that exchange that's happening, that framework is actually breaking open different possibilities at the very small scale to get the toe in the water of, how do we again actually manage our public forests, which is a broken story in this country.
Yeah. And it's that connective tissue that then reaches out into all other aspects of all those people's lives and has all these extra community benefits, long and short term, as a result of focusing people on something like that. Yep. I have one more question for Costa.
Just before you ask that, I just digress back to, I love the idea of a health food store.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I leave that one with you.
I wonder when the first health food store, like when that became a term. I wonder.
I remember there was one Bloom's Health Foods, and they were in Sydney back in must have been the 70s. And and then there's just like the health foods. It's not even an aisle anymore. It's just this section. So what's that make everything else in there?
Yeah. I wanted
just saying. But anyway, back to
I wanted to ask you. We're of course we're going to have a whole 5 minutes for questions very soon. What springs to mind for you in terms of, you see a lot of communities, you see a lot of initiatives, you have a lot of people coming up to you going, "Oh my God, Costa, check out our amazing thing we're doing." If I say, "Hey, what's a really beautiful piece of connective tissue or community creation that what springs to mind?"
God.
The blur of all the things you've done.
What I've just been doing in the last 7 days.
Vibes.
I could pick a couple. Look, I know from
one. Just pick one.
I'll run off one into another.
Yeah. You got 4 minutes.
So to keep it local, I'll say the wonderful Yimbies, the Yes in My Backyard, the composting program out of Castlemaine. They're doing fantastic things. It's going to be on Gardening Australia on the Compost Awareness Week, first week of May. So keep an eye out for that, because that's an opportunity to say that there's not a one-size-fits-all, because there's FOGO, right, in the cities where they're trying to use your green bin to put all your food waste in. But that doesn't work in Brisbane, for example, because it's a warmer climate and you get maggots climbing over, and once people see maggots, they go, So I love that disturbance that we can't approach these challenges of the title of this talk with blanket approach. And it goes back to what I said about that hyper-local, like what's appropriate to our community at this point in time. But I'll just share this example. I've just been out in the Central Desert and we visited 4 communities all outside of Alice, ranging from 300 to 500 kilometres out of Alice. I'm talking small communities, which are a great example to illustrate what input and output means. If you deliver rubbish into those towns, that rubbish is presented there all over because there's nowhere that it goes. We went there and imagine we wanted to plant some trees. Now, if I go there and say I want a machine to dig the holes, that's not the message that I want to give to the children and the community. You got to dig the holes. Digging the holes into concrete in 42 degrees, that was a challenge. But then we prepared the holes properly. But it comes back to the story. And what was the story? We're planting a mulberry and a fig. I want these trees to grow so that you can learn grafting, so that then every house in that 40-house community will have a fig and a mulberry. And then when we go back, we'll plant 2 more trees and then the same deal. So then how do you, because there's projects everywhere that I see littering, that, we built an aquaponics system, 1 valve goes. Like, and this comes back to the very essence of what local is, using local resources, connecting with local systems. And so we planted these trees, but we got the elder women's, that's a bit Greek. We got the elder women's. So one of the elder women, she planted that with her granddaughter, right? She gave the tree a skin name. I could be just another white horse, white fella come in like everyone else. We took 2 trees, right? That was not a lot of money. Within eyeshot of where we were these structures built with a structure over the top, multiple millions of dollars spent on accommodation for a military invasion and takeover of those communities barely but a few years ago. Millions of dollars spent and them empty. And all you hear about is the residue of the impact of that period, right? So what I'm saying is we got to do things of significance with connection that onboard people in. So as a grandparent, imagine, and I said to the kids as they planted the tree, I said, everyone close your eyes. I said, imagine the smell of figs. I said, imagine sitting under this fig. Imagine sitting under this mulberry that we're going to train the branches so that it becomes a canopy and a cubby house so you can sit underneath and pick mulberries and look out and be in the shade, because I said, look at you sitting in the sun and it's 42 degrees. So I said, imagine that. And then you've got that at home, and imagine making mulberry jam and imagine making fig jam and doing that with your grandparents and with your parents and teaching your sisters and brothers how to do it. That story, that's how we bring people on. That's how you as elders can look at, how do I take the stories in my house, the stories in my kitchen, the stories in my life that go back to who affected you? Who did you look at with awe and breathlessness during your childhood? How can you create awe and breathlessness for the children around you? We were filming in near the Melbourne airport the other day, and we were just getting the crew together. This is part of the story from Alice. It ties around. No. And I'll just finish very quick. And I suddenly noticed like 30 kids barreling down the street. And I was like, what's that? And they're all talking and chatting. And I said, well, where are you off to? Is it sport or something? They said, no, we're walking to school. It was a walking bus, right? Not an adult in sight. What's your role as an adult? Support that. Be the eyes on the street. Like, there's so many ways, particularly as elders, that you can infuse these inspirational story connections to turn all of those changing challenges into action on the ground. And you know, planting things with children, harvesting things with children, growing things with children, talking, making time, answer questions. Every time a child says, why? Don't go, huh? Go, because blah, blah, blah. Why? Because blah, blah, blah. Why? Because blah, 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 blah. Why? Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
Which makes me think of the incredible knowledge in just this room in terms of...
Sorry, Kirsten.
No, that was fantastic. Sorry, I was going to come back around, but yeah. In terms of the relationships in this room to the country that you live in, the stories that you have, how you know how to grow things or how to do things, you know what works in this Central West environment, you know what doesn't work. You all have inklings of what might work better in 20 years' time than what it does now. And yeah, I love that the passing on of story, but also the passing on of skill can be a huge part of that. And quite often a lot of us are like, well, I don't know how to do it. But yeah, anyone who's living in a, even city folk as well, but anyone who's living in a non-city environment has all sorts of knowledges and noticings and skills that can be shared with other folks in a way that adds to adaptation and resilience and makes life better, even if you don't consider yourself a gardener, even if you don't consider yourself a permaculture designer. We have enough time for maybe one or two questions. A lot of the work that we do at Milkwood is like, you are overwhelmed. You are awesome. You are doing all the things. You may not be able-bodied. You may have also, you might be a carer who's doing triple shifts, but you want to make change or you want to do stuff or you want to improve life for yourself and those around you. And I'm such a huge advocate of the just choose one thing and start from there and choose one thing that you like and one thing that you can be in relationship with, whether that's, I love yogurt. I'm going to start learning how to make yogurt. I'm going to stuff it up. It's not going to be great every time, but within a year of taking on one little habit, you're going to have all sorts of relationships with microbes and yourself and know that, oh, that's easy. I can do that. And you can teach other people and da-da-da. But once the one little thing becomes a part of your life, if it's something that sticks because you like it, the flowering from there of all sorts of things which don't need to be plant-based, which don't even, whatever they are, can lead you into all sorts of other areas. And I'm a huge advocate of just starting somewhere and going from that place.
Yeah, and your yogurt distribution network will open up, like, it will open up a free trade arrangement that you do not need to call the president and ask for exemptions, because that will be a network where you will be able to trade your yogurt without even saying, can I trade something? You'll just say, here's some yogurt. And someone will go, here's some figs. And then someone else will go, oh, you're going away or you need some help or blah, blah, blah. So yeah, yogurt is currency.
The only thing I could add to that is channeling Sue Dennett, yogurt maker, but she would say, what can you not do? What can you sort of stop doing as an unnecessary habitual activity that may be part of all of that stress? How to edit out is that really necessary? That minimalism of how to slow down and simplify by discarding even things that may have been sort of seen as absolutely essential. Maybe they're not.
And paying attention to your own needs to be able to define what those are rather than what things you should be letting go of or what things society says you should hang on to. But yeah, that self-feedback to decide what that is. And the last thing I would say about it, is just how much tiny little things like that shift your perspective on so much else. You can't help but be a little bit of whatever it is. Doesn't have to be yogurt, just saying. No probs if you're not into that. But by the time you've made friends with it, by the time it's a part of your little world, there's just so much to it, and it's really exciting, and it's part of these natural systems, and it's part of your biome, and it's part of, it'll taste different in different climates with different animals' milk, and there's so many connections there that we are encouraged to outsource in this society that we currently live in. And reclaiming any of those tiny connections necessarily leads you to shift your thinking on yourself and your ecosystem, and where is the milk coming from? And yeah, there are so many little things that change and shift as a result of one thing. And yeah, life is full of habits. We got to eat something for breakfast. You got to sleep somewhere. You've got to chill out somehow. Looking at those things and figuring out what you want to do and getting more around it.
I suppose I would reflect on something that my mother told me in the high light of the early stages of the campaign against the war in Vietnam at a demonstration where we were being spat on and called commie traitors by people, and I was 11 years old, and I'm asking my mother, and she said, the purpose of a demonstration is not to change people's beliefs or the policies. It's actually a solidarity for those working on these issues to come together and have a sense of commonality, and then to go back out into their communities and do the hard work, the one-to-one discussions, which is the real work. And I learnt from that it is important to have a solidarity network, and especially the more radical you are. My Jewish ancestors weren't restricted in the ghettos just because they were pushed there by oppression. They were also maintaining their culture. And in a radical subcultural sense, the more you become distanced from the norms that are not the norms of people, but the norms of the system around, it can be overwhelming. So you need that support. But the quiet work, the real work, is that direct engagement where you're dealing with people without necessarily common understandings. And I think that having both of those, that solidarity and being out there in the sea of change and not being overwhelmed by how does all this work?
I will pop in before you give your amazing answer. 2 things. I would say that these things are often iterative. You get 5 people at the first one. Please don't ever get completely dissuaded or like, well, that didn't work. Like, this shit is iterative. Like, the next one may have some more. Next one may have some next. But it's the formation of that connective tissue that begets better and better things. The other thing I would say was when we moved to Kiama from a faraway farm, we were like, all right, we're going to do this community event. We're going to and couldn't get anyone to show up. Kiama is a coastal community. And the second time we did it, we let everybody know that we were going to have a lot of hot chips. And for Kiama kids, that's what worked. And so again, this regionality, if you want to call it, or whatever the heck it is, I was like, I'm not feeding them hot chips. That's terrible. And then I was like, oh, wow, there's 50 kids here because there's hot chips and we're also, making plant pots and doing all these things. I'm a big advocate for whatever seems to work locally as an inroad. No, I don't think that's a bad thing.
That's so true. Like, even we went to 4 communities last week, and one of the communities was already, like, the children were so into this program that we've set up, and they were already talking about the separation, and they had different bins and they were doing all these things. Another community, it is about that adaptation. Another community, what we had to do in the songs where because we do a project and we say rot or not, and we pull stuff out of a bucket and we say, is that rot or not? Where does it go? Which bin? For this community, we had to adapt on the run and just say, it goes in the bin, just in the bin. That's because that's all they have. They just have a bin. But if we get that in the bin, that changes the whole feel of the town. Then they start to want to aspire to the Tidy Town Award. And all of this then takes to the next level of building a better waste transfer facility and all these things. So by us saying, just put it in the bin. And so we sing a song about putting it in the bin. But then at the end we say, but this is a food scrap. So you could actually put this in your worm farm or your compost. This is a bottle. Where else could we put that? Oh, that gets recycled. And so you don't be rigid. The more rigid we are, we're over. When we spread it and just move with that idea that we're not, like people ask me, why do I have this community perspective? Well, I used to go to Greek school. I even went to Sunday school at the Presbyterian church. I wasn't Presbyterian, but it was community and there was activities. I went to the local RSL youth club. I played in the local sports football team. I played all these different things. And you say, why do I have that perspective? Because I've been in those local social situations. And the people in the footy team didn't necessarily mix with the people at the Sunday school, but they were people, as you said, Dave. They were people and they're all part of it. So my approach is, if you get one or two people and then they start to be your little amplifiers, don't judge it like the algorithm of what we've been forced into with these things, that it's all about likes and numbers. Numbers don't mean anything. I've been standing at an airport once and I felt this shadow come, and next second I was spinning around. I was going but horizontal, like a ride. And there was this 6'6" guy who picked me up and was spinning me around. And I kind of got put back on the ground. He said, "You don't know me."
That seems appropriate.
He said, "Our family knows you." And he said, "You bring my family together every week to sit and watch your show. And you have got us, we grow food together, we preserve food, we make yogurt, we do all these things. So what's my point? I don't know that. I'm not doing it to be picked up at an airport. I'm doing it because it's those people in those moments. So when I left that moment with the elder planting the tree with her granddaughter, Dirk Girl said to me that she was watching, and she said, when I said, "Close your eyes and smell," she said, there's one little, that two, three, four little girls were all going. You don't see the impact that you have. And it's not, more is not, less is not, forget that. Numbers aren't the sole cohort of success.
Quality rather than quantity.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That's why David's here, my translator.
So in conclusion, we have bins, solidarity, and hot chips. Thank you very much, Clunes Booktown. And thank you, Costa, and thank you, Dave.
Clunes Booktown Festival is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativeclunes.org.au. This podcast has been made possible due to the generous support of the Hugh Williamson Foundation.